All right. Just quickly, as Megan said, I'm the executive director at the Board of Accountancy. I'm glad you all joined us today. I know there's a lot going on in the profession and with the CPA exam, and I have packed a lot into the presentation today. One of the things I just want to make clear, sometimes even licensees are not aware of this, but TSCPA, or the Tennessee Society of CPAs, represents individuals and the profession, licensees in the profession. And what we do at the state board is we protect the public interest. And so our goal is to license individuals and firms, make sure you comply with your continuing education, and investigate complaints that may come into our office. And so we are a part of state government. So just wanted to make sure that we were clear on who we were each representing there, and I will move forward so we can get through some of this stuff. So here's kind of an outline of what I wanted to talk about today. I know a lot of you are here about some of the evolution discussion and the exams transition, so I will likely try to spend some more time on those slides than some of the others, but feel free to ask questions anytime along the way. And at the end, I welcome you to turn your video on or turn off your microphone and have a conversation if we need to about something. I think that's great as well. So we're going to talk about quickly what the CPA designation is, the eligibility requirements in Tennessee. Then we'll get into the trends in the profession that really led to CPA evolution. And then the new licensure model that hopefully some of you have seen, what to expect as we transition into a new exam that was a result of CPA evolution that will be launching on in January of 2024. Then I will try to highlight quickly exam administration, just the general of how you apply for the exam, and where some resources are for strategy and how to make sure you're successful with the CPA exam. So what is a certified public accountant? Well, hopefully everybody on this program knows, but it is an in-demand licensing credential. We have 650,000 licensees worldwide. So we license here in Tennessee, we license people all over the world. We have folks from China, we have folks from the Middle East, we have folks from Australia. So we don't have a lot, but we do have some. So it's all over the world. So it can take you wherever you want to go. Generally, CPAs are known to conduct financial statement audits. In fact, CPAs are the only ones that can do financial statement audits. And so it's one thing that's unique to being a CPA. One of the main things that a CPA does is protect the investing public in the capital markets. And so if you're investing your money in a company, you want to know that their financial information that they're sharing with you as an investor is accurate, and a CPA plays an important role there. And it's important in keeping everything stable. So it's a very important thing out there. As a CPA, you act as a trusted advisor, and you have a range of skill sets and services that you can offer as a CPA. Many folks, after they are licensed, decide to kind of find a niche somewhere. It might be in valuation and forensics. It might be in tax. It might be in audit. It might be in financial planning. It might be in cybersecurity. It might be in banking. So there are a variety of places that you can take the designation. So if you become a CPA, what does that mean for you? Well, instant credibility, right? So research shows that business decision makers rank CPAs as, sorry about that, my screen went away. Okay. They rank licensed CPAs as the most trusted financial professional. Employers around the world recognize it as a top accounting credential. So you have a competitive edge. So you're applying for jobs that other individuals are applying for. You've got your designation. So you're going to automatically rise to the top. And that's likely true in whatever you decide to pursue, even if it's not a true accounting position, because just the nature of passing the exam and becoming a CPA is well thought of. The work that you have to go through is intense, and folks look at that as a great thing. Career security. CPAs are always in demand. There's a demand right now for CPAs. So there's more jobs than there are CPAs to fill them. So also in a not so great environment when we're in a recession, typically CPAs still have options. There's lower unemployment, and even during a recession. So job security is a real important thing. So a plethora of career paths. You could go, as I mentioned in the prior slide, you could go into tax, audit, which are some of the traditional things, but you could also go into forensics. You could go into auditing of IT areas. So there's a lot of different options there. Your earning potential is really what you make of it. You know, partners in CPA firms are, I think someone told me recently, as a partner in a CPA firm, he was making more than his wife that was an OBGYN. So lots of opportunity there for some really good income. All right, so the license is issued by boards of accountancy, like me and the Board of Accountancy in Tennessee. So there's 55 jurisdictions. It's the 50 states plus Puerto Rico, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam. I know I'm missing a couple there, but there are 55 total jurisdictions. So the boards regulate the license and the public accounting profession. So according to the laws in those specific states. And we are fairly uniform across all of the 55 jurisdictions, but there can be differences. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But in some jurisdictions participate in international testing and licensed candidates from outside the US. And I already mentioned that we do that here in Tennessee, and you don't even have to be here in Tennessee to take advantage of that. All right, basic eligibility requirements. The 3 E's is what we call them. In Tennessee, we have a 4th E, and we'll start off with that: education. Candidates to be licensed generally need 150 semester hours of education and a bachelor's degree. The 150 hours is uniform across all of the 55 jurisdictions. It's important to note that some states do allow you to test earlier than receiving that 150 hours, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. You typically need a concentration in accounting, which in Tennessee, that includes 30 semester hours in accounting. 24 of those hours need to be in upper division accounting hours. We define that as junior and senior level courses. And then you'll also need 24 hours in business courses. So we do not look at your business education prior to you testing. If you test prior, we don't consider that, meaning you don't need any business courses to sit for the exam. You do need those business courses for licensure. So a little tongue-tied there. So in the next item after education is exam. Candidate can only take one section of an exam at a time, but you must pass all 4 parts of the exam in an 18-month period. That 18 months currently starts at the time that you sit for the first section that you pass. So you may hear some comments out there that this is being discussed, and it is being discussed about whether the 18 months is the right time frame. Should it be extended? Should it stay the same? What you're hearing right now are conversations. So nothing has been decided. And once decisions are made, it means a change in rules and statutes at the board level. Those typically take almost a year to make changes. So if you're hearing that, it's going to take time to actually see that happen. So for right now, it's 18 months. I'm also going to share with you some extensions that are going to be given as a result of the transition to the new exam. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. The third requirement listed up there for your license is experience. You need to have 1 year of experience, and that is equal to roughly 2,000 hours. The experience has to be verified by a CPA. It does not mean you need to be reporting to a CPA. So it just needs to be a CPA that's knowledgeable of the work experience. So it could even mean that you get the experience somewhere and then you interview for a job at a public accounting firm, and they can validate that you spent 6 months working somewhere else in the accounting department. And so things like that help people piece together their experience. We also allow you to quote, double dip a little bit in Tennessee. So if you do an internship, allow you to count some of that time towards your experience requirement. So you can keep that in mind as well. And then the final item there is an ethics class and exam that you have to take. And I'll mention that towards the end of the class and where you would find that. And those are the requirements for licensure. All right, to sit for the exam in Tennessee, we do require a bachelor's degree to be conferred, and we require 18 semester hours of upper division accounting. Remember, I mentioned earlier that you need a total of 30 to become licensed. So we have a slightly lesser requirement, 30 total hours, to be licensed. 24 of those are upper division to be licensed. We require 18 upper division to allow you to sit. So you can sit a little sooner than getting your full complement of education. So again, upper division courses are junior and senior level courses. So we don't allow those courses to come from community colleges, and internship hours do not count towards that 18 semester hours requirement to sit for the exam. Now you can count it towards the rest of your hours, accounting hours for licensure. So really important point here, you can submit your application for the exam while your education is in progress, but you have to complete that education before any of the sections. So this actually come up a couple of times as happens. And so if you believe you want to start testing in December, first of all, we're going to talk about December 15th is going to be your last day that you can test, but you do not want to sit until that degree is conferred, because those sections would not count should you end up passing them. So really important distinction there. And we can, are there any questions yet, Megan?
No, not yet.
Okay, great. Okay, so that was kind of the first section on eligibility for both licensure and then to be able to sit for the exam, and that is in Tennessee. If you decide that you end up wanting to be eligible in another state, you will need to work with that state board to figure out what those requirements are in that state. So we're going to move on, talk a little bit about trends in the profession and why CPA evolution became a thing really before COVID. So seems like a long time now that we've been talking about this and gearing up for this transition. So really what we're seeing are changes across the profession. Really, what is the biggest driver right now? I mean, technology, right? So ChatGPT, we heard about in December, and now everyone knows about it and have probably tried it out a little bit. So just the pace by which technology is taking over how we do things is phenomenal, but it is impacting the profession as well. It's creating new demands. It's creating new opportunities for CPAs. And so both in terms of the services that they perform, but then how they deliver those services. So graduates are now expected to have a deeper skill set and more expertise in technology as they enter the marketplace. So for example, let me just give you an example. So back maybe 15, 20 years ago, a new hire might do audit confirmations, and they might fill out the name and address on an envelope and send that letter to the person they needed the audit confirmation from. And then if they didn't get it back within 2 weeks, they'd write another letter and they'd send it out looking for follow-up. And that's what they would do. Maybe not their whole job, but that would be some of what they would do. Well, audit confirmations are done electronically now for the most part. And so you don't have to do that manual labor, I guess you would say. And so now you fill your time with something else, right? More things in technology, or you have to have a greater skill set in something else, rather than, sending out letters and tracking receipt of them. So an example of how things have changed over the years. So the American Institute of CPAs, or the AICPA, and the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy worked together on the CPA evolution process. And as they started to recognize this changes in the profession, they surveyed the top 100 accounting firms, and they said, what skills are you looking for? What do you want your new hires to have when they come in to work for you? And you'll see up there on the screen the top items that those public accounting firms were looking for. So information process controls, system and organizational controls, which lead to SOC engagements, IT general controls, cybersecurity, IT governance, data analytics, digital acumen. So these are all things that 20 years ago just weren't even thought about. So important changes that they learned doing some of these surveys. So now we know we need different skills than we did 20 years ago. So if you look at where we were in 1980 and you compare to where we are now, we have 3 times as many pages in the Internal Revenue Code. We have 4 times as many accounting standards. We have 5 times as many auditing standards. So we're kind of in a conundrum here with what do we do about the exam? So we could continue to stretch the exam to cover a greater range of skills and material, but with less depth. We could expand the exam so that you're taking, more than 4 parts, or you're taking it more over, multiple days, or you could find an alternate solution. And that was one of the kind of where they found themselves, is what's that alternate solution? So really, research shows that the body of knowledge, as we've talked about before, of a newly licensed CPA is growing rapidly. So the items that a newly licensed CPA, the items that used to be done by an entry-level CPA are being automated. They're being offshored. They're being done by paraprofessionals. And so the newly licensed CPA, the expectation is that they're going to have more critical thinking skills. They're going to be able to take information and make professional judgment and challenge assumptions. They're going to need to know whether there's issues with the information in front of them. They're going to need to know, they're going to need to apply skepticism and problem solving. So it's not just a matter of memorizing the information you've learned. It's taking the information you've learned and then being able to make decisions on that information. And so that's where the deeper skill set and requirements are coming from. So you add in the changing profession and what's expected, and we come up with this combined initiative between NASBA and the AICPA to look at evolving the licensure model to really reflect these changing skills and knowledge that the CPAs need with the introduction of so much technology in the marketplace. And the exam hasn't changed in the same way, and it really needs to. So how do we deal with this? So to get more specific about what newly licensed CPAs needed to know, they did some stakeholder engagement. Over a period of 3 years, NASBA and the AICPA talked to more than 3,000 stakeholders, and you'll see that on the right side of your screen there. Everyone from folks within the profession, state boards of accountancy, state societies, regulators, students, CPA firms, CPAs in business and industry, academia, to figure out, what these individuals thought about evolving the licensure model. And what they found out was that the profession agrees that newly licensed CPAs should really demonstrate a core competency of a common core of competencies, and that the licensure model likely needed to change in order to do this. and that any new model should make sure that there is that common core, that CPA should be positioned for the future, and that whatever changes were made, that the public interest was still being protected. And so here is what they came up with. This is the new model for CPA licensure. So under this model, all candidates are going to be required to pass 3 core exam sections. So you've got audit, FAR, financial accounting reporting, and taxation and regulation, or reg. And so you might notice that these are the same acronyms that we currently use for 3 of the sections, audit, FAR, and reg. I will say, as we transition to the new exam, that the content is being mixed up a little bit. Under the current model, you also have a section titled BEC. That section is going away. The content isn't going away. It is being moved either into sections of the core, or it's being moved into one of the discipline sections. And so each candidate's going to have to take that accounting, audit, and tax in the core. And then the candidate's going to be able to, those discipline sections are in that outer ring there of the model. The first one is the blue one, business analysis and reporting. The green one, or the orange one, is information systems and controls. And the green one is tax, compliance, and planning. So this is the model that was decided upon, and it is felt that there's is that true common core of competencies that every CPA needs to know. And then there are these deeper knowledge that individuals can show in one of 3 disciplines. It still provides for public protection. It reflects the reality of practice. It's flexible, and it does end up in one CPA license. So if some of you on this call take business analysis and reporting as your discipline, but some of you take tax, compliance, and planning, you're going to ultimately still have the same CPA license when you're done. So what will exam look like? And again, this is coming in January of 2024. So what's going to stay the same? Still going to be designed for a 1 to 2 year level staff accountant. No more than 16-hour exam, which is what the exam currently is. Candidates will pass 4 sections, as they currently do. Exam sections can be taken in any order, and no separate time limits to pass the core and discipline sections. So that's what's going to stay the same. What's going to change? So candidates, as I mentioned, are going to pass that 3 core sections, and then you're going to get to choose that one discipline section. So it's just a chance for you to show some deeper understanding in a current area. Candidates don't have the option to pass additional sections, so you do have to pass those 3 core and 1 discipline. So you can't pick 2 core sections and pass 2 discipline sections. So it doesn't work that way. And the discipline pass does not, again, differentiate the license that you're granted. So we're going to move on a little bit into the examples of some of the content, and I'll try to talk through this a little bit. This might be of interest to many of you on the call. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, hit the wrong back button. So examples of content that are going to appear in each of the disciplines. So in information systems and controls, you'll see some things on business processes, information systems, information security and governance, confidentiality, privacy, information security and governance, SOC engagements, IT audits. I would say this has a bit of an audit slant, but is very focused in the technology sector. And probably where most of the new content is. There's also some new content really in all of them, but the majority is primarily in this ISC and then the tax planning and compliance and planning. So the second section there, business analysis and reporting, you'll see data analytics, financial statement analysis, managerial and cost accounting. So some of your industry type things were from a controller standpoint. more advanced technical accounting and reporting, state and local government accounting, and kind of a point of emphasis there. My understanding is there's not too much in state and local government in the core sections. So that has been moved to one of these disciplines. If you do not take the bar section, you won't see much in the way of state and local government. And as I mentioned, the new content is primarily in ISC and TCP. Do we have any questions before I move to the next slide?
Yes, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
I want to start with one that is going back to experience.
Okay.
And John, you may have to elaborate a little bit on your question, but I'll just read what he wrote. John is wanting to know about older people who have been out of school for a while and have experience in the industry, and they want to sit for the exam. I'm not sure, John, do you want to clarify your question there?
Yeah, actually, so I've been out of school I'm 45 years old, been out of school for a long time, got my bachelor's in business, but have been working in the bookkeeping world for several years. I want to know how that kind of fits in with the experience side. Do I need to go back and take some more classes before I can sit for the exam and possibly get the CPA license?
Okay, so there's two, thank you for your question, John. There are two pieces to that. So from an education standpoint, you will want to work with NASBA to have your transcripts reviewed as they are. You can get an advisory evaluation to find out if with the education that you had, what courses would apply towards licensure at this point. So they'll be able to tell you where, if you need any additional coursework, where that would be. So that's the first thing. From an experience standpoint, your experience does not have to be earned after you pass the exam. So as long as the experience is obtained over a 3-year period within the past 10 years prior to your application for licensure. And so you can use maybe, let's say you'd be eligible for licensure in the next year to 2 years, then anything that you have been doing recently would qualify under that experience requirement. Does that help?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Right, and then we have one more question switching back to what is on this slide. The question is, what if I were to take the BEC exam before December 15th of this year? Will I keep that credit after the change in January? If yes, which new exam would it replace?
Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So I will answer that question when we get to that slide. It's going to have everything you need. Is that it for now, Megan?
Yes, that's it
Okay.
for now.
Oh, and here it is. It's the next slide. Okay, so this is the transition policy. So we do recognize that there are folks in the middle of testing right now who will need to transition. And so the one really important thing that I want to say here is there is a hard cutover on the exam. So the last day you can take the exam is December 15th, 2023. And that's the last day that BEC will be offered. There are no exceptions. There are no extenuating circumstances. So please keep that in mind. Let's say that you have already taken BEC and you have credit for that particular section. Well, that will count as one of your disciplines. And so if you enter into 2024 with credit on BEC, then you will need to take any of the remaining courses you haven't passed, or any of the remaining sections that you haven't passed, audit, FAR, or reg. And so just to kind of state that again, this is the mapping that you're going to see. I think it's pretty simple. Candidates have credit for audit, FAR, and reg on the current exam. Will need to take the course, will not need to take the corresponding section of audit, FAR, and reg of the new exam. Candidates who have credit for BEC on the current exam will not need to take any of the 3 discipline sections. If, however, you end up losing credit after December 31st for some reason, then if you lose credit for audit FAR or reg after December 31st, you must take the corresponding new core section audit FAR and reg, where the content's going to be a little bit different. And if you lose credit for BEC, then you would have to end up selecting one of the discipline sections. So I've heard all sorts of different exam strategies. There are some that are rushing to take BEC and get it out of the way. And then there's others that are maybe they're really excited about the tax area. And so they feel like doubling up on reg and tax compliance and planning will focus their study efforts in the tax realm. So and I'm sure there's many more strategies on how to select the sections you may want to take this year. And of course, maybe you're not ready. You won't be ready to test until sometime next year, and you won't need to worry about a transition. So we're going to talk a little bit more about extensions on credit as well here in a bit. So this really important slide as well, key dates that you want to be aware of. October 1st is the deadline for first-time BEC applications. So if you think you want to get in there and try to take BEC before it goes away, that is your deadline of applying with NASBA on that BEC section. So please keep that in mind. If you have already been approved and you've taken the BEC section, but unfortunately you failed, your deadline to apply for a re-exam is November 12th. Re-exam applications get approved within a couple of days, where first-time applications can take 4 to 6 weeks to be approved. And that's assuming that they have all of the documents that they need from you. November 15th, the last day, the NASBA's gateway system, that's their licensing platform, will process your authorization to test and notices to schedule for BEC. And so by then, if you don't have your authorization to test by that date, then you would not be eligible to sit for BEC this year. And we go down there November 2nd. They are going to begin processing authorizations to test and notice to schedule for the new discipline section. So you can start there in November with applying for those sections. December 15th, again, is the last day of testing for all CPA exam sections, and it is your final day for BEC. Keep in mind, if you're going to be testing this fall, we expect slots to fill up quicker than normal. So make sure that you are giving yourself plenty of time to find that perfect test date and time and location. December 16th through January 9th, there will be no exam sections administered. This is to allow conversion time to the new exam sections. So we do expect the launch first day of testing under the new sections to be January 10th of 2024. Here's another schedule to be aware of, and this is available. All of this information is available out there on some various websites, but this is your test administration for 2024. These are the dates that the core sections are available for testing, when you might receive your score reports, and then dates that the discipline sections will be available for testing and when you might get your score reports. A couple items to note here is that there are going to be score delays next year. So those of you that may have already been in the testing or in the mindset of testing, you're used to getting your scores either in 1 week or at the most 4 to 5 weeks. But this will be significantly different next year. So if you'll see there, for example, if you test in January let's say you test January 15th in one of the core sections, you are not going to get your report until at the very earliest May. So you've got some waiting to do there. And then also note there that the discipline sections are only going to be tested for a total of 4 months next year. So you'll have 4 different blocks there for which you can test for a discipline. So this is going to take some planning and prep for individuals that want to get this in. And then of course, there'll still be score holds on those as well. The score holds are really meant to make sure there's a whole process that psychometricians go through to determine the cut scores, to make sure that it's a legally defensible exam. And that takes time when you've introduced entirely new content and questions. And that is reason for the score holds. The good news is that the Tennessee Board of Accountancy has approved some extensions. And I do expect additional thought to be put into this for folks that start testing in 2024. But anybody who has credit for one or more exam sections on January 1st of 2024 is going to get an extension on that section or sections until June 30 of 2025. So you're going to get an additional kind of 18 months tacked on there. And the purpose of this is because we know there's going to be score holds. We know there's less opportunity to test. And so individuals are going to get some more time there. And that is automatic. No candidate action is going to be required there. All right. So before I go into this next part, any additional questions, Megan?
Nope, not at this moment.
Okay, great. Exam administration. All right, so some basic information about the exam and everyone that's involved. It can be confusing. And if you're hearing this for the first time, don't let it scare you away, because you'll get it figured out. But there are the boards of accountancy. Of course, I represent Tennessee. There's the American Institute of CPAs. They develop and score the exam at the AICPA. And then there's NASBA, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, and they have the National Candidate Database, and as well as CPA exam services. So we are one of 32 states, Tennessee is, that we contract with NASBA to evaluate your education and approve you to sit for the exam and for licensure from an education standpoint. So you will do a lot of work with NASBA before you ever actually come to us at the board to apply for a license. And so they do this evaluation in accordance with our law and rules. And if there are ever questions, then they reach out to us for answers. So they're not out there on a whim making their own decisions. So, but it does ease the resources that we need at the board level. And so that is their role. And Prometric is where you're going to take the exam. So they have testing facilities all over the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. So the candidate bulletin, this is available on the NASBA website, and it has everything that you need to know about the details of exam, the process of taking the exam, your eligibility, your application fees, your scheduling, test centers, requirements on test day. That's very important that you're prepared and you know what to expect. You're going to get how you get your exam scores and other information. Again, that's available at nasba.org. So this is kind of a visual of the candidate process. So you are going to determine your eligibility. So you think you want to sit for the exam in Tennessee, you're going to look at the requirements in Tennessee, you're going to make sure that you feel like you meet the requirements, or if you're going to sit in another state, let's say you plan to move to Nebraska when you're done here in Tennessee, and maybe you want to sit under the jurisdiction of Nebraska. Keep in mind that you can qualify to sit under any jurisdiction of your choosing. It doesn't mean you have to travel to Nebraska, in my example, to actually take the exam. If you qualify under Nebraska's rules, then, but you could still actually go to a Prometric test center here in Tennessee. So just something to think about. It took me a while to actually be aware of that. It seems simple now, but I don't think it's always really clear. Once you determine your eligibility and what jurisdiction you want to apply under, you'll submit an application. Once approved to sit for the exam, you'll schedule that exam. And then you will go to the Prometric Test Center, take the exam, and wait the appropriate amount of time to get your score. And so one of that first option there was to apply for the exam. In Tennessee, you're going to do that via NASBA's website, because as I mentioned, we contracted with them to kind of handle all this pre-licensure steps for us. And so you're going to go to NASBA's website, and at the bottom of the page that you can't see in this visual is are all the states that they process applications for. You'll click on Tennessee. You can review the requirements and any other information that you need to know. And then there is a place there to apply. You are going to be asked to create an account with NASBA. And once you create that account, this is what you're going to see. And it's basically different tiles for the different areas that you may end up working in. But the two that are important, likely for those of you on this call, are going to be the CPA portal and the CPA Central. So CPA Central is where you'll start. This is where you'll do your application for the exam itself. And this is where you'll apply for the exam sections. It's where you would update any changes in your contact information, those types of things. The other section is going to be, oh, I'm sorry, before I get to that, applications that you're going to want to submit with that application are going to be official transcripts from each institution you attended. Because remember, even if you didn't get any counting hours at maybe a junior college, those hours can count towards your 150 hours. So you do want to include all of the transcripts from all of the institutions. You'll want to get a notarization photo form. This is required in our law that we get this. So you'll have to do that. And then a certificate of enrollment, if applicable. As I mentioned earlier, you can start to sit for the exam before you have your education completed. Your certificate of enrollment allows you to apply in advance of that being completed, and it allows NASBA to know what you still have in process before being eligible to sit. So the candidate portal, on that screen you saw with the different tiles, you had the application, the CPA Central, which is where you apply. And then the portal is actually where you would go retrieve your NTS or notice to schedule once you've been approved to sit. And this is also where you'll go look for your scores. So those are the two main areas that you will be, quote, doing business with NASBA. So your notice to schedule is what you're going to receive after you are authorized to test. And this is an important document because you will take it to the testing facility with you. So you'll want to make sure that you inspect it when you receive it. Look at your IDs, look at the expiration date. It does last for 6 months. A pro tip, don't apply to sit for all 4 sections right off the bat. You want to apply for the sections that you believe that you can successfully attempt in 6 months. So a good rule of thumb is to maybe limit this to 2 of the sections per NTS application. So just something to think about there. However, I will say there are plenty of people that come through here that pass all 4 sections of the exam in 4 months. So it certainly can be done. This is just I'm sorry. So you have your NTS. It all looks great. You're excited. One more thing I want to mention about the NTS. Some people go to print that NTS on the day of testing. And remember I said you have to take it with you. I would plan to do that a day or 2 ahead of time. What happens if your printer runs out of ink? What happens if your internet's not working? So it's just always good to be prepared because you cannot sit for the exam, even if you're scheduled, without that document. So keep that in mind. Prometric, once you have your NTS, is where you're going to go schedule your exam. And you also can find out about test center closures here or anything else related to the test centers you can find typically on their website. This is just a screen to show you kind of what their pro scheduler looks like. I've played around with it and it allows you to look for testing locations. You can also pick a time period and find out what dates are open for various sections of the exam. So I think it's helpful in trying to assess when and where you want to sit. Also keep in mind that things book up, and if you want to plan on a date, I would schedule it as soon as you can, because if you want to log in today and try to take an exam next week, it might not happen. There might not be anything available, and especially at your chosen location. All right, any questions before I continue, Megan?
There's no questions in the chat. So just
Okay.
a reminder, if you do have questions, feel free to pop those in there and we'll make sure we get to them.
Okay. I really want to focus on or highlight the importance of an exam strategy. Whenever you decide that you're ready to start doing this, think long term. You know, is the next year a good time for me to study, to take various sections of the exam? How much time am I going to give myself? Am I going to give myself 3 months per section? Am I going to give myself 6 weeks per section? A lot of things to consider. Am I getting married this year? Maybe might not be the year you want to sit for the exam, but if it is, great. Set up a plan so that you can manage all of those things, because it might be difficult. And one thing that's difficult is you get in there and you pass one section, and then all these things come up, like you're getting married and all your friends are getting married. So you're spending a lot of time at pre-wedding parties and that kind of thing. And you didn't have time to study. And all of a sudden that first section now might be expiring. Oh, I need an extension. Well, you can apply for extensions of credit with the board, but they typically look to make sure that the reasons are very extenuating and that they aren't something that you could have planned for. So just keep that in mind. So some key takeaways are to study, section by section, just focus on one section at a time. We'll talk here a little bit about exam blueprints, but understand your requirements, understand that candidate bulletin that I mentioned. Those things are important. And manage your time wisely. Rely on exam partners. If any of you have started testing, you'll know that those study partners provide a lot of information and good information at that. So consider that. I'm going to give you some more resources as well as we get a little bit closer here to the end. So when can you test? Well, currently you can test year round. We have what we call continuous testing. And so if you take a section and you receive a notice that you have failed that section, you can turn right around and schedule it again. We talked a little bit before about how this is going to change with the new exam. So you'll want to keep that in mind, obviously. And one other thing I failed to mention is that score release dates are out there publicly available, so that you know, if I sit on this date, I'm expected to receive my score on or about this date. And that is available on the AICPA's exam webpage. You can just Google AICPA score release and it'll give you the score release dates. One thing I'd like to mention is that on that listing, it says if we receive your data by, let's say, April 13th, you'll receive your score by April 25th. Let's just say that is the time frame. I don't have it in front of me. But if you choose to sit on that last day of that kind of rolling score release time frame, there's a chance that data might not get over to AICPA to score. So there aren't guarantees with that. So the closer you get to the end of that, the likelihood is it could roll you over to the next score release period. Now, with the score holds that we're going to have under the new exam, there won't be those issues because they'll be they will collect all scores before releasing those, because it won't be for a couple of months. All right, some resources that we'll note here quickly. Make sure you're checking out AICPA.org. They have a lot of resources for you. This is mainly information on exam announcements. You'll be able to find the exam blueprints here, which I'll talk about on the next slide. You'll have sample tests. And so it's the actual software that is used in the exam. And so we really encourage you to go take a sample test. It isn't necessarily about the content or the likelihood that you know the content. It's more about getting a flavor for how it's set up, how you're going to see it in the test center, how you'll be able to use resources and those types of things. So I highly encourage you to do that when the time comes. I mentioned exam blueprints. So we've mentioned all the sections of the exam, but that information has to come from somewhere. So what content is on what section, and that is outlined in the exam blueprints. So the exam blueprints are I'll quickly tell you how they come to be, but they're the result of what we call a practice analysis, which is a research project where they determine what content is needed to be on the exam. And so once they formulate all of that, they release CPA exam blueprints. And this is basically your outline of content that's going to be covered on the exam. Your exam prep providers will use the exam blueprints to prepare their study materials for you. So even if you don't spend a lot of time in the details of the exam blueprints, I want you to know they're there. If it's something you think would be helpful on content, on allocation of what you need to study, maybe you take a section and you don't do well on it. Maybe it's a chance for you to go back and say, okay, well, I didn't do well here, and this is where I need to do better. But do keep in mind your exam providers use this very closely when developing their materials. And I mentioned this just a few minutes ago, the practice with AI CPA sample tests. These are really important. You'll get a sense of what the multiple choice questions look like, what the task-based simulations look like. You'll be able to figure out if the way you answered them was correct or not, but also keep in mind these sample tests specifically on the AI CPA website are not there to gauge whether you know the information well enough or not yet. It's more about the experience and the software. This way to CPA, this is also with the AI CPA, but this is a little bit more geared towards your journey to becoming a CPA. So profiles of real life CPAs, tips and advice from those who have already passed the exam. I believe there's some information there on scholarships, information on their student memberships, and various things like that. And then NASBA.org is where you're going to find information on applying for the exam and getting ready for the mechanics of the exam. NASBA does do a significant email campaign. Once you have applied with them, they will send you emails giving you updates on anything that's going on. Testing changes, test center issues, candidate bulletin updates. Let's say you have a notice to schedule that's about to expire. They're going to send you an email letting you know it's about to expire and to take advantage of a testing date. And so NASBA will send those types of things out to keep you informed. On the right side of that screen, you're going to see some social media places that you can follow for information. And on this next slide, this is probably one of the biggest resources I see from a collaboration standpoint is there's the CPA exam candidates forum. This is on Facebook. I guess this should be updated a little bit, but there's a very active candidates forum on Facebook, and there's over 12,000 members. There are active discussions among candidates that are looking to pass the exam, and there's also folks who have passed who come back and give some suggestions on how to tips and tricks on passing the exam. So a good place to go there. Real quickly after the exam, in Tennessee, this is specific to Tennessee, we do require that ethics exam, which I mentioned early on. It really focuses on the tenets of ethical and professional conduct. And when I say that, I mean the code of conduct. So the AICPA has a code of professional conduct, and most state law and rules require any CPA to follow that code, whether you're an AICPA member or not. So that ethics course does cover that content. It is what I would say kind of an open book test, but you do have to score 90% or better on that. It is an online exam. You can obtain that through TSCPA or the AICPA. And you want to just make sure once you take that, that you select the one for licensure. They do offer a course where you don't, your answers to the questions are not scored, and you want to make sure it's scored because you need a 90% or better on that. Most folks take this at the very end of the process after they've passed the exam, after they've gotten their experience, but you don't have to. There isn't a requirement as to what order in which you need to take this ethics exam. And in Tennessee, just kind of steps for licensure once you're at that point. Keep in mind that if you apply for the exam and you only meet the requirements to take the exam, you don't meet the education requirements for licensure, you're going to have to go back and be reassessed for your educational requirements for licensure, which means you're likely going to have to submit updated transcripts. So a lot of people miss that. So just to make sure that's clear. Once NASBA has cleared your educational requirements for licensure and you've passed the exam, that file will be submitted to the board. And once we receive those files, we call them the candidate file, we will list your name on our website. And that is your indication that we have what we need from NASBA. And if you've met the other requirements, you're free to apply for licensure. And that you'll get instructions from NASBA as well. Exam scores do expire currently 10 years from the date you passed your first section. So if you get wrapped up into life after you pass that exam and you think, oh, I don't need to worry about that, do keep that in mind that those exam scores expire. So if you come back to me in 20 years and say, I should have gotten that license, I might have to say that those scores are expired and you're going to have to go back and take the exam again. So just keep that in mind. Experience, again, 1 year of experience, 2,000 hours. And we talked about that earlier. All right, that brings us to the end, Megan. Happy to have a conversation or take any additional questions.
Yeah, we had one question in the chat. Do you have to receive a score, pass or fail, before you're allowed to schedule any future test?
Not any future test. You have to receive before you can retake the same section, you have to get your score. But let's say that you started with BEC and you haven't gotten your score yet, you could go ahead and schedule reg if you wanted to.
And then we just had another question. Is there a limit on how many hours can be from internships?
Yes, great question. I'm sorry I didn't cover that. Right now, that is in board rules, so it's not up to the discretion of us at the board, but it is limited to 6 hours currently. So keep that in mind.
I don't have any other questions in the chat. Does anyone have anything? You're welcome to unmute yourself or turn your video on or send it in the chat if you have questions.
When you say 6 hours from internship, do you mean like 6 hours that we can use the internship for education credit?
Correct. You can only apply 6 hours towards your accounting hours and also towards your 150 hours.
Okay. And then
Yes.
I think I heard you say that if we don't have our 28 upper level hours, we can't get them at the community colleges. Is that what you said?
Correct. Upper division is considered junior and senior level courses, and the board does not accept those from community colleges.
Okay.
That is one thing that does vary by state. Some states have the same requirements as Tennessee, but there are others that do allow community college credit. And also those were just for the accounting hours. If you just need hours to fulfill your 150, then we would accept the community college hours.
I just had a question. Can internships be counted towards 1 year of experience?
Yes,
Kind of talked about that.
yes, yes, they can.
Anyone else? Let's see. Does the experience have to be a full-time paid position?
There's no requirement that it has to be paid, and there's no requirement that it has to be full-time, but when someone has part-time hours, we do require you to substantiate the hours. So it might be something from your employer that lists how many hours you were paid for, or I mean, how many hours you worked over a period of time. So when it's not full-time, we do have you kind of itemize, I would say, the part-time hours.
Okay, it doesn't seem like anyone has any other questions, so thank you very much, Wendy.